Alright, hello again. This is Jeff Scott of Blackhawk Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations for Muroc's MySQL text. We have so far gone over the first 8 chapters of the book, so as you can see, it's time to start Chapter 9. And again, this is the book that's used for the online version of 152-147, which is the Relational Database Development class. Okay, so let's start Chapter 9, How to Use Functions. Now, I did mention this to you in the previous chapter, but I am going to say one more time again that if you go out to the reference manual, there is a whole section out there right under the data types, which we talked about in the last chapter, for functions and operators. So they'll talk about a lot of the stuff in this chapter, but as an example, they'll talk about the string functions. So if I go down to string functions and click on that, hopefully eventually, there you go. There's examples of all the different string functions, and you can see there are several. Okay, so let's just get into it then. Alright, so how to use functions. Code queries that format numeric or date-time data. Code queries that require the use of the scalar functions presented in the chapter. Describe how to use functions that involve string data, that involve date and time. And here are some of the string functions. I already showed you that previously. Okay, so you've seen this stuff already. And if you do go out, as previously mentioned, if you do go out here and look at this, if you do go out and look at the stuff under the, under here, and for instance, if I go out to the concat and click there, all right, they give you examples of how it's used. All right, this is really a very, very nice help system that gets included with the stuff that you have available to you for MySQL. More string functions, and here's some examples. Now the concat we've already looked at. All right, and there is a difference between the concat and the concat WS. I'm trying to remember offhand what the difference is, so I did pull out my book. So concat concatenates the specified strings. If one is null, the result is null. Concat WS concatenates the string with a specified separator added between them. Okay, so in the second example, what we said was the separator that we want between these two things would be a comma followed by a blank space, and that's what you can see here. The trim functions we've talked about already. All right, ltrim removes leading spaces, rtrim removes trailing spaces, trim removes both. Okay. Lower for lowercase, upper for uppercase. Notice MySQL 3 when you say left, so it gives you the first 3 characters, and right gives you the last 3 characters. All right. And again, I don't want to keep going over all of these examples. Hopefully what you'll find out is most of the ones that are in there are at least fairly intuitive. All right, so here's an example of something that uses a bunch of these. Well, let's look at this. All right, I got kicked off from last night from the virtual desktop. Alright, so this is the stuff that you saw yesterday. And if you remember, so if I select star, from employees. All right. So you've got what? Select concat. I spelled select wrong. Select concat first name. Let's do last name. Last name, comma, space, first name, as full name from employees. Function work.contact does not exist. Oh, it's concat, not contact. All right. So I spelled it wrong. Concat. And you can see what I get. Okay. Now, is that big a thing? No, not at all. And the other way that they showed of doing it was with the concat WS. Which I believe stands for word separator. And what that means is I believe we put this first. So we say single quote, comma, space, single quote, comma. All right. I don't know if I did that right or not. We'll find out. From employees. Oh, and again I spelled it wrong. And you get the same result. All right. What's the old saying? 6 of one, half dozen of another. All right. So it works fine either way. We'll look at a few more as we go through here too. So select vendor name, and so what are we doing? We're concatenating the vendor contact last name and first name. We're putting it into a new field called contact underscore name. All right, and we are making sure that we put a comma and a blank space in between what's here. All right. So here we're coming through and we're saying check, and if the vendor phone has, it looks like an area code that begins with parenthesis 559, those are the ones we want. And what we're doing out of that area code is we're removing what? We're just grabbing the last 8 characters. So in other words, we're saying that if it is 559, maybe that's our local area code. I don't know. But what we're saying there is we don't want the area code or the blank space that comes after it to be in there. All right. How to sort a string column that contains numbers. Select star. Well, the big thing is there's different ways that you can do it. Notice they say that you can cast it, which will put it in the right order. All right. You can implicitly cast by adding 0 to each one, which will again do the same thing. Or we can end up padding on when it's necessary. Which one do you use? The answer is you use the one that makes the most sense to you. All right. And just like virtually every other programming language that you work with, here's another example of something that what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we want to break this down here, and what we're saying is until you find a blank space, that becomes the first name. And going the other way, until you find a blank space, that becomes the last name. And this is important because there is a lot of, literally there is a lot of database code out there where people have created things in a poor way. And what I mean is, what they have done is they have created a field called name, where they put the first name and last name in there, where it really should have been broken down into two fields. And we'll get to that a little more in the upcoming chapters. Notice there's a locate in here. All right. The example's kind of silly because they're trying to locate where, in what position do you find the first blank space, and in what position do you find the second blank space. All right, you'll notice that a bunch of these have 0, which means there is a blank space, but there is not a second blank space. There are substring functions where you can go and grab stuff. So there's another, here again they are taking, as they did before with the substring index function, now they're using the substring function to parse a string. So there, as always, there's plenty of ways that you can do this stuff. Okay, let's talk a little bit about numeric functions. Okay, there's a round function, there's a truncate function, a ceiling and a floor function, absolute value, sine, square root, power, rand, and those are some of them. There are a lot of functions also that deal with trigonometric functions like sine, cosine, etc. So here's some examples. 12.49, notice if we round it with 0 decimal places, since it's less than 0.5, we round down. Here, since it's 0.5 or greater, we round up. 12.49 to 1. Truncate gets rid of it, regardless of where it is. So if you say to truncate, and you say to truncate with 0 decimal places, it doesn't matter if it's 12.99. It gets rid of what was previously there. The ceiling and floor, those are kind of interesting. As you can see right here, the ceiling of 12.5 goes up to 13. So it always goes to the next highest number if it's 0.5 or above. And floor always goes to the next lowest number if it's 0.5 or above. Absolute value removes the sign. All right. Not sure exactly what this sign thing that's in here does. Let's take a look at the book. And we're all the way up to page 251, where it says sign returns the sign of the number as -1 for a negative number, 1 for a positive number, and 0 if the number is 0. And there's rand too, to give you a random number. Here's 9 squared. Here's the square root of 125.43, etc. All right. Functions that work with the current date and with the current time. All right, I've used the now function for you before, so that's one of the few times. All right, I don't know if you remember this earlier, but one of the things that we talked about when we were working previously, when we worked with using the select statement, is I said that technically using the select statement, the from clause, which says from whatever table or whatever, that literally that is optional, because I can type in, this should work, select now, and you see what I get. All right. And there's different times that you can get, current date, current time. Here are some examples that deal with those. Again, it's not my idea right here to go over every single one of these things with you. When we get to that point where we're going over the actual stuff that's in the code, or I should say that's in the book, as opposed to going over the PowerPoints, we'll go over more examples of this stuff. Some ways that you can parse date and times to grab the day of the month or the hour, the minute, second, etc. Here are some examples of that. There's an extract function where you can grab, again, different things from the date and from the time. Here are some examples. You'll notice, for example, for seconds, it's 00 because there are no seconds. 35 for minute, 11 for hour, 3 for day, 9 for month, 2011 for year, etc. There are different, these are output formatting functions that you see right here. So it says there are 2 functions for formatting dates and times. So if you decide you want to, you can, just because you have to input them in a certain way, doesn't mean you have to output them in that way. Here are some of the common codes that go along with these. Now, when you work with dates, there really are not a whole heck of a lot of calculations that you can do. You can do date add, date sub, date diff. All right? And why would you want to use those? Well, what if I'm a company that as soon as I send something out to you, payment is due 90 days after that. So I could, for example, I could do a date add and I could add 90 days to it and it would figure that out for me. Date sub is what you think. It's if you have to subtract the difference between 2 different dates. Okay? And it's very similar to date diff. Here's some examples. All right. 3 techniques for ignoring time values. Well, the point is, if you're working with dates, time may not matter. And again, we've talked about this before, that if you don't put in a time to begin with, the time will always default to midnight, 00 colon 00 colon 00. So that may not matter to you. All right. If the time does matter, of course, you can use it. But if it doesn't matter, if everyone's is midnight, you probably don't care. All right. Again, there's just plenty of examples in here that ignore these different types of date values. Let's talk a little bit about the case function. The good news is that everybody who's in this class should have at least completed the 152-119 class, which is the JavaScript class. And in there we went over the case statement. Now, the syntax isn't exactly identical, but it's very similar. Case terms ID, when it's 1, it's due in 10 days, 2, 20, 3, 30, etc. All right? Just another tool in your arsenal, so to speak. Do you have to use this? No. You can use an if, and there's other ways that you can do it. However, this is probably as easy a way of doing it as any other, and probably easier than most. So here's the syntax. There's also, as it says, a searched case function. And there, notice that it's when this, and then there's an else that is the equivalent of a default. There is an if function. As it says, if test expression, what you want to do if it's true, and what you want to do otherwise. So in many ways, this ends up working very similarly to like the question mark colon operator that we've seen in other programming languages. You can check to see if something is null or not. And there is a coalesce function. I should grab my book there and look for that again because I've used it, but I don't remember offhand what it does. Both the if null and coalesce functions let you substitute non-null values for null values. Although they're similar, the coalesce is more flexible because it lets you specify a list of values. Then it returns the first non-null value in the list. In contrast, if null only lets you specify 2 expressions. If the first is not null, it returns the first. Otherwise, it returns the second. Okay. And that's it for the chapter. So we've finished another chapter, and that finishes, I believe it's section 2 of the book. So when I do come back again, we're going to be going over chapters 10, 11, and 12. And if you notice on here, quickly look at these. 10 is on how to design a database. 11 is on how to create a database, including setting up tables and indexes. And 12 is on how to create views. All right. Now, if I do come up with time to do this, after we do this, I am going to go in and go over chapters 13 through 19, but I'm not going to give any homework from them. So if you're taking the class with me, you won't have any homework in chapters 13 through 19. Since I'm not going over any of the homework, all I will do in chapters 13 through 19 is just go over the PowerPoints. All right? So I will be coming back to start chapter 10 shortly.